I would imagine.
Welcome to Spirit of Light Virtual Church, where we reach the unreachable. Looking to further your education in the Word of God? Spirit of the Light Church is offering a $2,000 scholarship to the most compelling application. To apply, the details will be available on the next slide and on our website. If you wish to contact us here at Spirit of the Light Virtual Church, you can reach us on our Facebook page, Spirit of the Light, or you can reach us via email or our website, or you can reach us by phone and our address. We'd be more than happy to take your prayer requests or any questions that you may have. Please feel free to contact us. Thank you again for attending Spirit of Light Virtual Church. For more content, please feel free to join our YouTube channel, like and subscribe our videos there, or on Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, please come and join us for our live Bible study via Zoom. Once again, thank you for your attendance and have a blessed day.
He's not the author of confusion. Oh no, he's not the creator of despair. Oh no, when the tempest isn't raging, oh, and the billows in your life seem to roll.
Welcome, everybody, to Spirit of the Light Virtual Church. We are doing Christianity 101, which is our beginner series on the Bible. We've been talking about the Bible for a few weeks now, and for this week, we're still on the historical books, and hopefully we'll get through the historical books this week. So let's get started. Again, in looking at the Old Testament, we will kind of keep reviewing this multiple times so it kind of sinks in. There's 5 sections to the Old Testament books. The Law and the Torah, the first 5 books, the historical books, where we are now, poetry and wisdom, major prophets, minor prophets. And we're on the historical books, and the historical books are pretty much the history of the Jews. And in the historical books again, we have Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings. We have covered all of these thus far. 1 Chronicles, 2 Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. So hopefully this week, tonight, we'll cover First and Second Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. Now, we kind of talked about the original Hebrew Bible when we first started talking about the Bibles. It's in 3 sections, and the Ketuvim, or the writings, is the 3rd section of the book. The first section is the law, then the second is the prophets, that has all of the prophet writings, and then the third is called the writings, where it has Psalms and Song of Songs and things like that. Now, in containing this book, they have Ruth, Chronicles. Chronicles was split into 2. We'll talk about that tonight. As for Nehemiah, which was 1 book, we'll talk about that tonight. And then Esther. When the Bible was translated into Greek and into Latin, these 4 books were moved out of the writings section, and an historical section was created. There wasn't an historical section in the original Hebrew Bible, and these 5 books were inserted into the historical books section, which also includes some of the books that used to be in the prophets section, which are the ones that are in white, with the exception of Ruth, that we already talked about. And the Hebrew Bible was not in chronological order, but when they translated it into Greek, Latin, and then English after that, they tried to put it in a more chronological order. Okay, the history of the books, the historical books of the Bible. It's, like we said, it's pretty much a straight path, starting with the book of Joshua, went all the way through 2 Kings. Then the book of Ruth, this kind of covers a small segment of time. It's not in chronological order with the rest of them. And then tonight we'll be covering the ones in green and in orange, which is First Chronicles, Second Chronicles, Ezra, book of Nehemiah, and the book of Esther. So let's start with First Chronicles. Like the books of Samuel and Kings, Chronicles was also 1 book in the Hebrew tradition and in the original Hebrew Bible. The Greek translation split the book into 2 and called them the things left out or omitted. This title somewhat misrepresented to mean that the book documents items that were left out of Samuel and Kings, and that's not totally true. And the English title, Chronicles, which we have now, comes from the Latin translation title, the Chronicle of the Whole Sacred History. The author of the book is debatable, but Jewish tradition attributes it to Ezra. And the timeline of Chronicles, both First and Second Chronicles, overlap the events that's in 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and 2 Kings. First Chronicles specifically covers events ranging from 1003 BC through 970 BC.
What about that?
And the book of Chronicles show a dependency on the books of Samuel and Kings, but there are differences in the ways information is presented from Samuel and Kings to First and Second Chronicles. One, the beginning chapters of First Chronicle gives us the lineage of the Jews going all the way back to Adam, the first man. They give us a glimpse into the entire history of the Jews through the ending era of the kings. Samuel and Kings highlight the monarchy or the kingdoms, the kings, and the history behind that, how the monarchies failed, and God's condemnation of the kingdom as a result. Chronicles focuses more on the restoration of Israel and the priestly nature of the characters. Chronicles focuses only on the southern kingdom of Judah, and it completely ignores the northern kingdom of Israel. Remember, we talked last week, King David brought Israel and Judah together into one. There was a split after Solomon into Israel and into Judah. Chronicles both 1 and 2 only highlights what happened in the southern kingdom of Judah. And also, Samuel and Kings document negative information about David in Solomon, the author of First and Second Chronicles, left that information out. Again, First Chronicles starts with the listing of the Jewish heritage and leads up to Saul, who was the first king. It moves through Saul's downfall, and David replaced Saul as the king. It highlights the many conquests that David had as king and David's desire to bring the ark back to Israel. And God makes a promise to David, and that promise was what we talked about last week, and it echoes the same thing that's in Kings. King David prepares a home for the ark, and he leaves direction to Solomon in First Chronicles. Again, in summary, Samuel and Kings focused on the kingship of the men involved, while Chronicles focused more on the temple, the people's worship, and how they were faithful to making a new start. Second Chronicles. Second Chronicles continue with the kingdom of Judah from around 967 BC through 609. The first 9 chapters describe Solomon and the construction of the temple for the ark. Chapters 10 through 36 give a depiction of the various kings of Judah after their split from the northern kingdom, their commitment to God, and their disobedience. And in the end of chapter 36, it ends with King Cyrus of Persia allowing the Jews to return to their homeland, continue their religious traditions, and to rebuild the temple, which was destroyed by the Babylonians. Again, the history spans kind of between 971 BC through 539. A recurring theme in Second Chronicles is faithfulness. The kings that obeyed God's covenant prospered, and those who did not was faced with God's condemnation. These are the kings that was prosperous. Asa, Jotham, Hezekiah, and Josiah. But we had a list of kings that were condemned as well. Jehoram, Joash, Uzziah, Ahaz, and Manasseh.
Please keep in mind that these are only the kings of Judea. Israel kings are excluded from this list.
Correct. And we're going to the next slide to give more light to that. God was the God of Israel, but he influenced the outcome of his people, sometimes through actions of non-Israelites. And King Cyrus is a very good example of this, who was a Persian. He was not an Israeli blood, he was a Persian. But when the Persians conquered Babylon, God used King Cyrus to send the Jews back and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And to Rosamond's point, we covered this slide last week. On the left, the kings of Judah, the right, the kings of Israel, Judah being the south, Israel being the north. There were, again, you see various good kings for Judah, various bad kings. Unfortunately for Israel, all of the kings were bad. And the Babylonian conquest, the Syrian conquest with the Syrians that defeated Israel, that happened much sooner than the Babylonians capturing the Judah territory, and the Israel tribe and land never recovered. They was dispersed up through today's time. But again, we remember Second Kings ended with the king Jehoiakim being released from captivity by the king of Babylon. He wasn't placed back in power, but they allowed him to be out of prison, and he was paid a ransom. And we know the kingdom of Judah was eventually restored. That's what we're going to talk about this evening. These were the lists from the previous slide. The good ones of Asa, Jotham, Hezekiah, Josiah. The bad ones, Jehoram, Joash. Uzziah had a second name, which was Azariah, Ahaz, and Manasseh. So now that covers First and Second Chronicles. Now we're going to discuss the book of Ezra. Now, Ezra was a priest, and he was in the lineage of Aaron, who, as he said, was Moses' brother. Or we might not have went over, when we talked about the law. And the Levites were the priests. They weren't given land, and Ezra was of the Levite clan as well. Ezra was also a scribe, and a scribe was someone with an outstanding ability to read and write. He was tasked with teaching and interpreting the Torah for the exiled Jews that returned to Jerusalem. As in the time of Moses, as the generations died, Israel's knowledge of the law became less. So in Ezra's time frame was one where he reestablished the Mosaic law for the people who had been captured in Babylon. They had their culture cross-mixed because the Babylonians did not allow the Israelites to practice their religion, which was, when we talk about the book of Daniel, that was a very big thing because Daniel held to his Jewish culture, which created some conflicts for him. But as a nation, Israel relented their traditions. So as they went back, they had to relearn all of that. And again, the authorship of the book is debated. But again, Jewish tradition attributes the book of Ezra to be written by him, or at least a good portion of it. Ezra and Nehemiah was one book in the Hebrew Bible, and then when it was translated, it was split into two. The events in Ezra take place between 537 BC and 456. Shashbazzar was a Jewish leader that the king Cyrus sent to Jerusalem to begin rebuilding of the temple. And the king also provided him with provisions and treasures to accomplish his task. And Shashbazzar was the governor of Judah, and Zerubbabel followed Shashbazzar, and he was the second governor of Judah under King Cyrus, and the completion of the temple was under his reign. The prophets Zechariah and Haggai, who each held their own book, was present during this period of time, and they both was influential in the completion of the building of the temple. Now, King Artaxerxes sent Ezra to Judah. He was commissioned to restore the law of Moses. And one of the issues that Ezra faced was intermarriage. It was not law for the Jews not to marry outside of their race, but it was law for Israel and the Jews not to make any covenant with the nations residing in the land. So they perceived as an intermarriage as being a covenant between Jews and the nations that congregate. And so marriage was perceived, and the wives were blamed for the faithlessness of their husbands, and many of the people who were intermarried were high officials in chieftain and authority. So our next book will be the book of Nehemiah, which we see falls on the arrows in the wrong spot, it should be over there. As it got large, the arrow moved. So it's the book of Nehemiah. The events in the book took place from around 445 BC to 432. Now, Nehemiah was a cupbearer to King Artaxerxes. And a cupbearer was someone assigned to fill the king's cup and to bring it to him. The purpose was to ensure that it was not poisoned. And this was a high-ranking officer who filled this role. And Nehemiah heard from his brother that the state of affairs in Jerusalem was in dire straits. He spoke a prayer to God that night and he left. Later on, when he was in front of the king noticed that his disposition was not right, so he asked him what was wrong. And Nehemiah asked him if he could be sent home to repair his land. And the king did just that. Artaxerxes appointed Nehemiah as the governor of Jerusalem. The book of Ezra focused on the religious restoration of Jerusalem, while Nehemiah focused on the political restoration. The wall around Jerusalem was built under Nehemiah's time, and that was something that he had major interaction in. And the book of Nehemiah also covers Ezra's reading of the law to the assembled people. This placed Israel under conviction and helped renew their covenant with God. This also led to an oath of commitment to obey the law of Moses, and is listed in the book of Nehemiah, those who actually signed that oath. And lastly, in the historical books is the book of Esther. In Esther, as you can see, a very short time frame, and the events happen in the middle of the events in the book of Ezra, so it's not really in chronological order. Now, Esther is the only book in the Bible that does not mention God by name. The author, who is unknown, perceived that God was at work with the salvation of the Jews, although they didn't make the actions obvious that it was God. But when you read the story, you can truly see God's hand in everything that transpired. Now, unlike Ezra in the book of Nehemiah, the Jews in the story of Esther stayed in Persia. They did not go back to Jerusalem. There's 4 major characters in the book of Esther. There's Esther, her cousin Mordecai, King Xerxes, and Haman. Haman was a remnant of a family that the Jews were instructed to destroy. They allowed his ancestor to live, so Haman had a deep contempt for the Jews, and his plot and scheme was planned out based on the hatred he had against the Jews, based on what they did to his family. This part is a lesson we also take away from this, is that when God tells you to do something, you need to be faithful to the direction of God, because the disobedience can come back and create issues for you down the road. And I think Haman was one of those issues that was created down the road due to the Jews being disobedient to God's direction to kill everybody.
Saul.
So yes, thank you. I believe Saul was the one who was told to kill everybody, but he
The queen.
came with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and Haman is from the bloodline of that king.
Shechemites.
To leave.
I believe it's the Shechemites, right?
Yes, it was the Chechemites. Now, Mordecai was Esther's cousin, a older cousin of Esther, and he had favor with the king. And Mordecai also kept to his Jewish tradition, which created problems for him down the road. But because he heard of a threat against the king that he passed on to the king, the threat was taken care of. So Mordecai always had favor with the king based on that. And that turned to be a saving point for Mordecai within the story of Esther.
One thing we have to also remember that the Israelites or Jews, the Judeans, had favor with the Persians because of the prophecies of Daniel regarding their victories. And Xerxes' son, the king at that time, is the king that we're talking about now in the story of Esther. And so Mordecai was undoubtedly very important to him because Daniel and his friends and the other Jewish leaders had proven themselves to be smart, proficient, intelligent, and blessed by God.
Now, Esther, like Mordecai, held to her faith as well. In her being a faithful Jew and faithful to God was in her favor as well. Due to her faith and how she lived her life, she stood out when the king was looking for a new queen after his wife was banished because she decided not to go to a festival which the king had. So the king was advised, no, she's being disobedient and you can't have that, so you need to get rid of her, which is what he did. And he went out to look for a new queen, I'm sorry. And Esther really stood out to him. Now, part of Haman's scheme was to kill all the Jews by convincing King Xerxes to write a law. And help me out here, Ross, if I get this wrong. The law was that any Jew that worshipped in public would be killed. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct, yes. Kind of similar to what happened in Babylon.
Correct. So Mordecai came to Esther and he tried to talk Esther to talk to the king about what was going on. But she fasted before the festival that they were about to have to ask for direction on what she should do. Because she could not just go to the king. The king had to request her presence, which at the time he had not done. So she fasted, she prayed to come to a decision on what she should do. But because of who she was the king loved her so much that she was able to get the audience with the king. And because of what was shared, what Haman was trying to do actually backfired on him, and he was the one who was killed instead of the Jews. And because of the resulting of this, the Jews won more favor with the king, and they were actually allowed to kill all of their oppressors that was in Persia at the time.
That wanted to kill them. They were allowed to defend themselves. Yeah.
So the festival of Purim was started as a response to this salvation moment for the Jews. So although God is not mentioned, you can see God's hand in everything that happened to preserve the Jews, and did more than preserve them. It solidified their political and their power base and within Persia. Like Ross said, King Cyrus was prophesied that he would be picked by God, which won favor with the Jews. And Xerxes, who was his son, followed suit and gave the Jews a lot of leeway and control and power, although there were a faction of the Persian people who wanted them to be killed. So this takes us all the way through the historical books of the Bible. So the books of poetry and wisdom we'll pick up next week. My wife, assistant pastor, Evangelist Ross, has her hand up. Yes, ma'am.
That was one other aspect that I thought was critical to the story of Esther, which is the value of a virtuous woman, the value of a godly woman. She was put in the highest position in that country because of her virtue. And if you don't believe that men value the virtue of a woman, just try it, women, and see. Men love a virtuous woman.
Amen. That's why I picked one. All right, so thank you for joining us, Spirit of the Light Virtual Church, as we going through Christianity 101. We're working our way through the books of the Bible. Just completed section 2, the historical books. We will be moving into poetry and wisdom, which is Psalms, Proverbs, Song of Songs, and Ecclesiastics. We'll pick those up next week. Here's our contact info: Spirit of the Light Church, Facebook, where we're streaming live now, YouTube, we're streaming live on YouTube, and the video will be there afterwards as well. Phone number and address if you decide to reach out. So we just want to thank you very much for your time. The opening video shared all the upcoming events we have coming up weekly. Prayer meeting Wednesdays, Sabbath commissioner ceremony on Friday, and our other normal Bible study class where we get into more deeper topics Sundays, 9 o'clock Pacific time in the morning, and we have our monthly sermon. First Sunday, Minister Doug McQuarrie gave the sermon on the vineyard, this second in the series yesterday. So feel free to pull that up. It's on Facebook and it's on YouTube, and it's quite a treat. And we do our communion first Sundays as well. So hope everybody stay blessed, and looking forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you very much for your time.
Everybody.